Welcome, welcome, welcome to, like I said before, part two of Maroon Archives, Cartographies of Freedom, a wonderful collab with Kinfolk Tech and Black Radicals. My name is Jamie Swift. I am the founder and executive director of Black Radicals. And if you're not familiar with us, we are a Black feminist advocacy organization dedicated to uplifting and centering Black feminist activism around the world. This collab with Kinfolk Tech is a part of, once again, Maroon Archives, Cartographies of Freedom, and it is also a collab with our School for Black Feminist Politics and our series on Black feminist Marronage. I once again want to just shout out our amazing panelists, Sed Miles, Marilyn Nance, Kleaver Cruz, Zakiya Collier, and to our amazing ASL interpretation team, and to the wonderful Dele and Raven, who are co-leaders of Kinfolk Tech. So I just want to say thank y'all for being here, and I want to pass it off to Raven.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And yes, I just want to thank everybody for being here in the audience, as well as all of our esteemed guests and ASL interpreters. My name is Raven Ruffin Felice. I am Director of Strategic Partnerships at Kinfolk Tech. Kinfolk Tech brings place-based stories to light, weaving together art, collective storytelling, and technology to create immersive narratives that reshape history, connect generations, and open new pathways for imagining the future. And our initiative, Dreaming with the Archives, is a multi-city initiative that launched on Juneteenth 2025 to harness immersion technology and imagination for cultural preservation and social justice. Through Dreaming with the Archives, Kinfolk Tech has hosted location-based community workshops, film screenings, and critical conversations such as this, while creating digital monuments that carry our shared histories forward and reimagine public spaces for new futures. And we're also really excited that part of what brings this panel together is the work of Kleaver Cruz, who has been a fellow with Kinfolk Tech for the last 9 months. And so we're excited to share a little bit about the work that they've been doing towards the end. So please stay on the call after we wrap to see a little bit of the beautiful research, archival research that Kleaver has been doing as well. And so as we get started, I want to read the brilliant bios of all of our panelists before asking just a few questions to honor the amazing work that they all do. And so to start, Marilyn Nance's artistry takes on many forms, including photographs, prints, fiber arts, installation, and social practice. A graduate of New York University's Interactive Telecommunications program, Nance is a digital pioneer. Her website, soulsister.com, an artifact of the ancient web, has remained online without interruption for more than 25 years. She is known for her persistence, meticulous record keeping, and preservation, and vigorously encourages others to care, for their collections. Nance's motto is 1, keep the archive safe, 2, organize the archive, 3, make the archive accessible. Nance's photographs are active agents in the work of diasporic memory, a concept elucidated by Nydia A. Swaby, a Black feminist, artist, researcher, and curator in her book, Amy Ashwood Garvey, and the Future of Black Feminist Archives. Nance's work is in the collections of the Brooklyn Museum of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Museum of Modern Art, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and the Library of Congress, and has been published in the World History of Photography, History of Women in Photography, and the Black Photographers Annual. Marilyn Nance is a 2024 honorary fellow of the Royal Photographic Society. She lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. So honored to have you. Kleaver. A lover of words and their meanings across languages, Kleaver Cruz was born and raised in uptown New York City between the Bronx and Washington Heights with their twin and small family. Kleaver is a writer, educator, and artist that is deeply interested in the crevices of archives and history, those dusty spots that get less light and care but are brilliant all the same. Their work is the marriage between curiosity and what has come before and the creative imagining of what can be. There's an insistence on creating mirrors and clearing up the ones already there. They have presented and conducted work across the African diaspora. Kleaver is the facilitator of the Black Joy Project, a digital and real-world affirmation that Black joy is resistance. Kleaver is a 2024 nominee for the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Debut Author. They are the author of The Black Joy Project, a literary and visual love letter to how we thrive. Kleaver believes in the power of words to write the stories that did not exist when they needed them the most. So excited to have you as well, Kleaver. Sed, scholar, artist, global strategist, Sed Miles is a Fulbright Fellow and interdisciplinary artist working across photography, painting, mixed media, and participatory performance. His projects have been exhibited in more than 10 countries, weaving together academic research, visual storytelling, and community-driven art. As founder of Atlantic Archives, a global movement amplifying historically underrepresented voices, Miles builds bridges between scholarship, cultural memory, and civic engagement. His practice, rooted in the Black Atlantic, explores archives, surrealism, and the lives of working class communities as sites of beauty, dialogue, and resilience. And last but not least, Zakiya Collier is an Afro Carolinian archivist, memory worker, and educator. Her work and research explore archival practices that account for the material conditions of Black life and the role of cooperative thought in the sustainability of cultural memory. She leads the Black Memory Workers, a community of over 300 Black diasporic memory workers committed to practicing care and intention as they prioritize the documentation, long-term preservation, and celebration of Black life and experiences. Zakiya is currently a 2025 Create Change Artist in Residence with the Laundromat Project, an adjunct professor at Queens College and New York University, and the program director for Archiving the Black Web. She is also a co-producer on the forthcoming documentary film, Somebody's Gone, and co-editor of a special double issue of The Black Scholar on Black archival practice. So honored to have all of you here and excited to welcome you to the stage.
Do you want to see us now?
Yes. I was like, you all can turn on your cameras. There we go. Now everybody can see you as well. So excited to kick this conversation off and wanted to kind of set a stage a little bit of what brings us together in this moment. And so was thinking about the work of a few scholars, in particular, Saidiya Hartman. And so a question for you all. In Venus in Two Acts, Saidiya Hartman speaks to archival violence that, quote, the archive is a death sentence, a tomb, a display of the violated body, an inventory of property, a medical treatise on gonorrhea, a few lines about a whore's life, an asterisk in the grand narrative of history. On the other hand, scholars such as Alexis Pauline Gumbs, Catherine McKittrick, and M. Jackie Alexander have theorized how Black feminists transformed the archive from a site of death into a generative space that Gumbs calls, quote, a breathing chorus, where past struggles become blueprints for world making and futurity. And so, as it's been said, this is a two-part series, Maroon Archives, Cartographies of Freedom, and it's a convergence of Black women radicals taking up of Marronage and Kinfolk texts taking up of dreaming with the archives as necessary strategies and blueprints of Black fugitivity, flight, freedom, and futures. And so I'm curious, how do you each see yourselves and your artistic, archival, and political practices as part of this grand arc, legacy, and cartography of Black freedom, resistance, and survival? How does your archival and artistic practice function not merely as recovery of documentation, but as active world building and as a technology for envisioning and constructing? And lastly, in what ways are you using the past to dream and construct new geographies of freedom? So there's a lot of questions to dig in there, but excited for anyone to jump in where they feel called.
Kleaver?
I was gonna ask you to speak first.
Well, I think we all kind of, you sort of pulled us all together. So
Oh, I think that's to you, Kleaver, that you pull us all together.
I was ready to learn. Hey, y'all. Thank you for having me. What comes to mind is often I share how the call to Black joy is an ancestral one. It's an inheritance that even though it's part of the zeitgeist in this moment and it feels very present, that it's something that wasn't created in this moment, not the understanding or the concept of it. So I see my work as a way to be that bridge of understanding the root, which to me is the beginning, the first people, the humans, so to speak, that existed. That Black joy comes from that place. It can, if we want it to, if we want to connect in that way. The well is that deep to draw from. Um, that yeah, and that the archives, where that fits into this, to me, is telling the truth. The not full truth is that it's all about suffering and these types of things. It's dishonest to say that our lives were that simple when we know that in reality in this moment it's dynamic and it's always been that way. So to shine light on Black joy, to elevate it, is part of telling the truth, the whole story, the fuller story of our lived experiences. And there's something healing, cathartic when you see images like that, when you get to see that many, many, many moments before yours, you can relate to a person that could have been your family member, is in the ancestral realm, that was living, and that's always, and that part of that work too is to always remember that Black joy is not the opposite of anything. It's an element of our experience, and that we have to see it that way, and one that we can actually access really consciously, and that is just a part of our existence. Um, I just drew a blank, but I'm gonna stop there.
when I first started working with Zakiya, I mean, well, before working with Zakiya Collier, I started calling this collection of things that I did the Marilyn Nance archive, and people thought I was being funny or with the, like, I don't know, using that word. But when I started working with Zakiya, I was like, is this an archive? What's with the word archive? And it's out of a colonial history. And so I can understand how Sadia Hartman would have said, that the pain of the archive, but to piggyback on what you said, Cleve, there's that joy too, and there's a part of our existence that we know about and we can represent. And when I show my work or when people see it on exhibit, they feel something and it is healing. And I think it is important for us to collect things that we know about and bring us joy, and also uh, return it back. I'm at the point now where I'm looking at work I made 50 years ago. And to say that makes me like, and by the way, my website has been online for more than 30 years, not more. I think there's an old bio, not more than 20 years, but I have photographs from 50 years ago. And I am really pleased that I can, like, uh, because of technology, like make a copy of it and send it to somebody and have a dialogue about that, and show people who they were when they were babies or their parents and things. That's important. So we have redefined what archive means. It was dusty and painful and all of that. And it is based in real estate too. You have to have space to collect that stuff, but we're finding ways to, I guess, digitally make space.
I didn't want to step on what you're going to say, Zakiya. Um, I appreciate the question and everybody's responses so far. It's something that I think about a lot. I'm still trying to figure it out. But within the question itself, you mentioned a couple of things that are a part of how I've been thinking and how I've been trying to put it together for myself. When you mentioned Sadia, who was here in Salvador a couple of years ago,
Mhm.
and I took a group of the young people that I work with here to archive her time here. I think she had a Portuguese version of, I think it was Lose Your Mother, and She was working with some Black feminist groups at the universities here. And um, there are moments like that that I know the people in the panel understand where you just have a compulsion to have to document something about it. I have the projects and materials that have never been seen before, but it's kind of separate from the need to make sure that some of this is recorded and seen or recorded for later, but especially what the moment meant for people. Because what I see during these moments are people waiting to act on the opportunity to figure out how to be Black and proud, or Black and have joy. And I think that this is something that's just difficult to do all over the world um, for us. And even before that, years before that, you mentioned Alexis Gums when I was in Durham running a local TV station there. We recorded. She would come in and we would record her. She had a show that she filmed on her laptop called "Eternal Summer of the Black Feminist Mind." I think it was one of her first. She was so good because she would just open the laptop and just start doing it. Like she's who she was, who she is. She's always been like that. And I have that, like I have stuff like that in my own archive. And so me trying to figure out what am I doing all of this for outside of the compulsion to be a witness to this assemblage of identity. And now I've seen that over 10 years in Brazil as well. The last thing I'll say is I've also been doing my dissertation when I was here. I just completed it like right before my birthday in August. And one of the things that I needed to create was a word that would symbolize that. And what I came up with was post-colonial entropy. And I would see this within each of the archives. So the idea that energy just moves towards disorder, the way that an archive, if you don't keep it up, will just scatter and lose meaning, or the way that ourselves, us as people, can kind of lose who we are because of post-colonial forces that have put us on this path. And I think what archivists do is put that energy back together so that it has meaning, because without it, we scatter into this world. And what really are they going to do with us once they use our energy for what it is that they want?
Wow.
Definitely share the link to the dissertation. Zakiya, did you want to add to this question?
Yes, I think, hard act to follow, and I appreciate all that has been shared before me, and 100% echo and embody those sentiments as well. I think I love this question because it brings in so many brilliant voices that shaped like my beginnings of even entering into archival practice. So I didn't enter sort of it with the desire to um, kind of like be squarely in the profession as an archivist, following all the rules. I came in determined to break the rules intentionally, and already had um, seen what problems had been identified by many of the Black women scholars that you named, and really began thinking about the ways that Black people document themselves outside of these structures, and the ways that the things that they do document and the impulses they have to do so informs these traditional archives that we typically think of, but like, what are people doing in their homes, in their communities, and how does that serve their efforts towards liberation and joy and continued survival and existence? And so I sort of began this work in graduate school, using part of Sadia Hartman's framing from Wayward Lives, and thinking about like those that eluded the frame and sort of remained fugitive. And so, right on topic with what we're here to talk about today. But like for those of us that may never end up in an institutional collection, what does that practice look like of remembering ourselves and deciding how we want to be remembered within our communities and being active in that process of ensuring that the people remember us and that whether we leave physical materials or we create art or we create things collectively with each other, or the impressions that we simply leave on the communities that we're a part of and the ways that we served and showed up, how can those be understood as memory practices as well? And like, how do they sort of fall in line with our ancestral memory practices that existed outside of these sort of cold and rigid structures that, exist in opposition to the ways that our physical body even exists, like these cold spaces that like don't feel good, right? And you have to bundle up and you have to sort of strip yourself of so many parts of yourself and what you can even bring into these spaces, and thinking about archives where we can bring our full selves into them and we can touch and we can feel and we can sing and we can hum, and thinking about like, what does that actually look like? How can we bring more of that? While still acknowledging and supporting and researching traditional archives as well, because many of my wonderful colleagues steward and exist in these spaces, and many of our histories are there, and worth, continuing to be cared for, and not, recognizing where there is sort of this like death impulse to like just like preserve and leave there and like but how can we bring life back to our ancestors and our community members that are preserved in traditional spaces while living and breathing and creating archives and documentation outside of those spaces?
Absolutely. Thank you all for those brilliant answers. We can honestly stop there. But to continue, one of my favorite quotes, I think in this last year, has been from Ruha Benjamin, which is, remember to imagine and craft the worlds you cannot live without, just as you dismantle the ones you cannot live within. And just reading each of your bios, there's so much that you all are dismantling and a lot that you're building. And so I'm just really curious about what those worlds are that you're reaching into and what you're trying to carry forward. And so I wanted to start with you, Miss Nance. Obviously, most mentions with you do include the mention of your documentation of FESTAC 1977. But I do want to situate that archive in the maintaining of your website, Soul Sister, which has remained online, like you said, more than 30 years at this point, and you call it an artifact of the ancient web. And so, in this era of platform decay, algorithmic erasure, and the enclosure of digital commons, maintaining an independent and continuously accessible digital space is itself a form of fugitive practice. And so, I would love if you could speak to how your insistence on digital autonomy, as you say, keep the archive safe, organize the archive, make the archive accessible, functions as a contemporary Maroon strategy. How does your work as a digital pioneer map pathways of technological sovereignty and freedom for Black artists and archivists? And then I'm also curious about the mention you make in your bio as well around diasporic memory. And so, how are your photographs functioning as these agents of diasporic memory, as you quote Nydia A. Swaby, and not just documenting Black life, but creating territories of remembrance and refuge?
Yeah, I'll start with Nadia first because reading Nadia's book made me number one. I was like, there's a tradition of Black women archives. I mean, I'm just doing what I do, and then I'm finding out, oh, I'm part of a tradition. Oh, like this is we got a little Quilombo going here. Oh, what so I'm finding out how I'm reaching. I'm just doing me, and I wasn't trying to be you said a lot of words, and maybe that fits, but I think mostly I'm hard-headed. I'm very persistent. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and in a world that says maybe you shouldn't be that way. Like I made a list of words that have been used to describe me, which would also describe my practices. Belligerent, which means warlike. That was a word I always knew because my mother would say, Marilyn, why do you have to be so belligerent? Which meant that maybe from early on I was questioning things or talking back or something like that. Outrageous. I mean, I will do something that you're not supposed to do just because I feel like doing it. I feel that that's, if the idea comes to me, that means that I can do it. Any idea can be realized. Courageous. I'm that. Honest. I'm hard headed. I mentioned really curious and persistent, and also very powerful. And that's something that's not, I'm not special. We all have power, and that's one of the things that I mentioned on my website. I mean, and when looking at the website soulsister.com, soulsista.com, it's everything like that I am kind of got poured into this website, which I started in like around 1994, 95, and I just built on. And there was a certain point where I just stopped building, and it's sort of an archive within itself. But the website also started because I was going to grad school, and I was like, I need a place to put this bio or put this information, because I'm not going to be in my, I won't be able to like feel the phone calls and things like that. So it in itself was conceived of as an archive of sorts. So now it's an archive with wrapped around an archive, because it's all kinds of old HTML and it's old, but but it still works. I mean, when that website was built, we like to have a 56K modem was like, wow, well, we really zoomed. This is before, this is when we still had dial up. And then when we got to the point where you could see a website on the phone, the images were so small, like 25K, they actually loaded on phones. I mean, so it's really lived a lot of lives, and it's still, it's like old furniture. It's still good. um, yeah, and there are a lot of things. As a matter of fact, the Festac images were on that website from way back then, because they existed from 1977. But I built a something that's no longer on there. But there was a project on Ifa divination, and it was illustrated with some of my images that I made in Nigeria, images of like Yoruba culture. So everything is everything. I'm finding out that everything I've ever done, I'm still doing. And the joke in the studio here, I have an archive fellow, Ashlyn Diaz, and it's like everything old, I can just kind of drag back in, because I was like, nobody was ready for it then. So, like, you put things in a place where it's safe, an archive, an online archive, and you just wait. Like, you people, I don't think anybody, well, maybe a couple of people, I'm looking at the screen, we're here, but like I'm old. And so there are people like, if you're 30 years old, you don't know what I did 30 years ago. And so there's a whole new audience. And that's one thing that I honor and respect. And just, I think it's important for the elders to communicate and share information with uh, the youngins.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think there's a lot in what you said, but definitely, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right, right.
It's good construction that you're working with. Um, Thank you for that. I want to go to you, Kleaver. So, Kleaver, as the author of Black Joy Project, you insist on Black Joy is resistance, a radical refusal of the archive of suffering that often circumscribes how Black life is remembered and represented. Your work is described as the marriage between curiosity of what has come before and the creative imagining of what can be, with an insistence on creating mirrors and clearing up the ones already there, as you mentioned, or as you say in your bio. And so, how does centering Black joy function as a Maroon strategy for you? A kind of deliberate political act of creating sanctuary and refuge in a world structured by anti-Blackness? In what ways does your work in the crevices of archives and history, those dusty spots that get less light and care but are brilliant all the same, kind of excavate and illuminate genealogies of Black pleasure, celebration, and life making that have been systematically erased? And how do you navigate the tension between the archive's tendency to preserve trauma and your commitment to archiving joy, abundance, and futurity?
These are like award-worthy questions.
Listen, I read the bios, okay?
Wow. I just want to say first, I really appreciate Miss Marilyn and her work. I read a novel that put me onto Festac, and it just put me in this hole, and that led me to the day that I met her, that met you. And just seeing you over the years speak about your experiences and being in community with other people that were at that event has been really powerful. Because my draw to Festac is this sense from reading interviews and the way that it was documented by people like you, that this was a really joyful moment too. And it's a very complex thing that there's a lot to be said about it politically. Um, but something about like at the artist level, what is clear when you look back at that moment is how powerfully joyful that was, and that led to a lot of fusions and just it shifted history, at least in the ways that Black folks and African folks were impacted by that. That to me, that's part of why I feel so drawn, because I don't consider myself an archivist or that type of thing. I'm just a nerd who really is interested in what happened before. That even leading down that hole, I eventually stumbled onto another person that participated at Festac who lived in Pittsburgh, and just seeing how he hoarded all of his stuff. He kept his ID from Festac. He just kept so many things. He was an amateur photographer, so he has tons of like.
Yeah.
Say it again.
Who was that?
BJ Johnson.
Oh, I don't know that person.
Okay, I'm gonna send you my notes.
Okay, yeah, I have the Festac Memory Project, and I keep up with
Oh my
everyone.
gosh. Oh, we gotta talk.
Yeah. Okay,
We
keep going.
do. But BJ, I'm just saying that that was another example of seeing in the archive. Similar, actually, I really appreciate what said about his archive is not organized in a way that it feels like the institution that is holding it cares in a certain way. Like they're holding it, but there was times where I had to correct things just by I just was again, I'm just a nerd who's volunteering to go to special collections on a Friday morning.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah, so I appreciated the way Sed framed that of the importance of intentionally preserving and the ways that Zakiya was saying that, and that doesn't always have to look the ways that these systems determine order, that type of thing. Because I actually enjoyed that in a way some of those things were misspelled, because then you have to really look to find it, if that makes sense. Um, the other thing that I was thinking about also is queerness. That's really important to me. And that part of what drew me to Festac, this like voracious dive, was really wanting to find evidence of people who were queer in that space. And
Mm-hmm.
that I'm still looking. I know they were there. But that
Festac
led me to the other, say it again.
Festac Memory Project. We got to talk. Yeah.
We do. Because what I will say though is that to the other thing that I wrote in my bio about the imaginative piece, that actually inspired me of then how do I imagine that? Because I know they were there. I
Mm-hmm.
don't need to exactly have the proof or the evidence, so to speak. Because
Mm-hmm.
if we're talking about a world gathering of Black people, there's no way that there wasn't a queer presence there.
Mm-hmm.
And that even if, for example, finding BJ's archive, there was things in there that were very romantic. Like you could read it as romance of
Mm-hmm.
letters between men. That again, that could be a combo of translation of somebody who's writing in English when that's not their primary language to somebody to an American whose primary language is English. And you know, if you know what I mean? That's like I know what I'm reading in between the lines here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that yeah, those types of moments are very powerful because queerness, because of the way society and all these things have been set up, we've always had to read between the lines or know the signal or that type of thing to pick it up anyways. that there's a draw in looking at the past for me in that way of always wanting to feel rooted that I can connect. There was people like me before. Then the moments that it feels lonely or why does it always feel like this certain level of persecution and knowing that I actually come from traditions of people and that there's evidence there and some of us have to do the work to really uncover like in the book when I talk about um, the uncovering of William Dorsey Swan's story in DC, who, for all intents and purposes, could be considered one of the first drag queens, creating that culture of somebody who, in the middle of Reconstruction, is gathering with other queer people, even define what Black people are expecting of Black people to come together at the risk of being arrested, at the risk of whatever could come from being openly queer in the late 19th century. But to me, that's still exciting. It's invigor. It's something about wanting to always feel remind each other that we were here. And that when I say Black people, I really mean everybody and not where often it has felt like that we talk about the select few. And usually that means cishet Black men. And then the rest of us have to stand behind and hope and wait for our spot or our turn. When the reality is that most of these things, because look at the panel, is mostly usually Black women and queer folks that come together to do this work. And that it's also been important to have the evidence to demonstrate that we deserve to be asked what our joy is and be witnessed in those answers and the action, the practice of those things. And that I'll say this as the last thing. That was in my book, there's this picture, I don't know if you can see it. It's these Black women in the military putting puzzles together. And it's clearly like the 40s. Um, that yeah, just remembering that and that's real right now. Like people are putting puzzles together, 1,000 people, this type of thing. You know what I'm saying? And that again, that's what I was gonna say earlier, and I'll end on this point, is that when we talk about Black joy, if we're being honest, it has to always be in the context of that joy. That's the part of the importance of my work and the connection of that on a global scale is that I see it as an entry to really understand what is going on. If I can tell you a story about somebody experiencing joy somewhere in the world, my hope is to then dig deeper of what is the life there though. That their life is not only joy. What's the fullness of that person's experience? That these women playing puzzles during presumably World War II in a segregated regiment. You know what I'm saying? Like all of that is also happening at the same time, and it would be dishonest to only isolate that as a joyful moment. That is more powerful to say in the face of all of those things, they had a moment to create a puzzle together.
And just talking about photography, everybody wants to see themselves, and just to show that image, means something to somebody. That's all I have to say. I'm short. Like
No, you're good. No, thank you so much for that, Kleaver. I think there again so much in what you just shared, but yeah, I think you just also circled back to more Sadia Hartman, who's very present in this conversation, of that critical fabulation, right? Of like even just the way you word it, like I know in my bones, like that affirmation that I don't have to have evidence, like I know it to be true, like and to build that world around it to create that wholeness, is yeah just such a radical act in itself in archives and world making. So thank you for that.
yeah.
So I want to turn to you, Sed. As founder of Atlantic Archives, your work is explicitly rooted in the Black Atlantic, that geography of forced migration, resistance, and cultural creation. Your interdisciplinary practice weaves together academic research, visual storytelling, and community-driven art across more than 10 countries, amplifying historically underrepresented voices. How does Atlantic Archives function as a contemporary Quilombo, a transnational space of refuge, solidarity, and world making across the African diaspora? And to bring Beatrice Nascimento into the conversation, they argue that Maroons map pathways, oceanways, and riverways to freedom as political and spiritual theorists. How does your practice map new oceanways and digital pathways of diasporic connection? In what ways do you see archives and your focus on working class communities as sites of fugitive knowledge production?
Okay. That- um, I'm still figuring that out. What I'll say, well, I want to just echo what Cleve was saying and just building on what everybody has said so far. I just appreciate the opportunity to talk about this work because we use the word maroon a lot lately. It's always out there. It's a very hot word. But when we think about it, oftentimes we may have this picture of drawing of a maroon moving forward, force and a lot of energy. But I know what that is, and that's great. But that's not where I am right now as a maroon. I'm the version of the maroon who just been getting his ass whooped out there, like out there, like a runaway, a person who's like outside and finding a new home or making places. And that work is really difficult. It's really, really difficult. Um, and I think that that's one of the things that I wanted Atlantic Archives to kind of represent. And a lot of it just goes back to my grandmother, Sally Mae Miles, passed away a few years ago. Um, I was having this conversation with Cleve when he was here. We were connected through Jamie, and he came to my crib at a really important time where, I was just a maroon out there trying to finish up some work, wondering if I'm gonna get back home. And we talked, and he's black joy. He's really cool, and he's just kind of keeping the level of the conversation in a very affirmative place. And I remember before you left, I was inspired to I was like, we gotta get a photograph. um and so we took a photograph, and to me, I immediately thought about my grandmother because she was the archivist in our
Mhm.
family. Also, you got two Afro-Carolinians here tonight. She's the archivist in my family from Bennettsville, South Carolina, and she lost most of her images that were everywhere, photo albums stacked on the floor, on tables and chairs, every wall filled with photographs, like in an extreme way. And the house got flooded due to some environmental uh, racism.
Mhm.
And I think that's when she began to decline. But before that, she had a special set of photographs, I guess, that she had with her that were safe. And it was just a stack, a small stack. And she was just handing out the photographs in her own way to different people. And she gave me the oldest photographs, which included a photograph of her enslaved grandmother, who was also named Sally, and other, which I believe were the oldest photographs. And so that was sort of what inspired me. But also, before that happened, I always knew my grandmother to have a garden. She had a garden of flowers in the front. Me and Miss Nance were talking about this last night. She had a garden of flowers in the front, and she had fruit and vegetables in the back. But her front garden was the most interesting because the one you see from the street. But when I would come home from college and she'd take me to her garden, she would plant a new plant for all of her friends that died. So all her plants were named after people that she knew, family members or friends who had passed away. And I
Mhm.
thought this was so interesting. I just it was normal to me because I grew up with it, but it
Mhm.
stood out to me as well. And so when I think about our cause, to Cleaver's point earlier, or to Zakiya's point earlier, I think that they are like living. They're there. They're there for the future,
Mhm.
and they grow. The information inside of it grows and is interpreted for people that are not here yet. So to me, that's growth. Like that's a living thing. And so when Cleve was here and we took that photograph, to me it felt like I was a plant that like needed some water.
Mhm.
And we're able to do that through what meant the most to me, which was image making and being witnessed or witnessing and holding that moment in time to say uh, what was just said earlier, that we were here. And I try to bring that, that energy into the work with Atlantic Archives, but it's really difficult because of the forces that are um, the real forces that are against our just existence in general. And so I can remember a lot of things that Mrs. Nance is talking about. And after a while, you start to see things just sort of repeat themselves, even politically. And when it was time for me to do this international work, I really had a hard time deciding like what uh, I would claim as sort of like my political position on certain things, especially when it came to challenging the academy in this way by challenging the idea of area studies, extracting knowledge from other Black communities around the globe. So to me, I just kept it really simple. Went back to my grandmother. I was the first to go to college in my family, and she was a domestic worker. She was a maid, like most of the people here, most of the women here, or most of the mothers and grandmothers of the kids that I work with here. And so that was my politic. I
Mm,
I first of all, I find out who's getting their ass kicked the hardest, and
mm,
we just go over there and help them. And when
mm,
I got here, it just happened to be and they came to me, it was a lot of the Black trans men who were like really expressing why their life was in the most danger at that particular time,
mm,
or it was people from different communities. But we just gathered those folks together and then try to funnel some resources through the university to them. I mean, they were the resources that were for my scholarship work, and I just couldn't leave it at that. Like it just
mm,
didn't make sense to me. So I turned my fellowship into multiple fellowships. And
mm,
then we used archiving as a way to put ourselves into the future,
mm,
and also get some of the material things like degrees and recognition and be able to build resumes and things that might help people to continue to fight. So most of that is just sort of rooted in what I learned from my grandmother in Bennettsville.
mm.
Well, I hear the ums. No, that is so powerful and it's so beautiful how something seemingly simple, and maybe even, could have just floated away from your memory, but that memory of the flowers growing in your grandmother's garden, was just such a form of record keeping that like just to think of the inventiveness of that, and just to hear how you are even creating your own forms of scaffolding of the fellowship of these institutions is very much so evident in what you witnessed, but wow, yeah, I'm gonna take that with me. I'm like, I need to do something with that. That's so beautiful.
I'm
Going back,
thinking, oh, go ahead, Marilyn.
going back to what I'll be fast. Going back to what Cleaver said, we're all our ancestors, and we're doing what probably somebody in each one of our lines kept things. I know my mother did. And just last week I was at Zakiya's open studio, and there was which was about archiving, but she presented a poem that was about a garden and weeding in a garden and making analogies between that and archiving. What do you keep, what do you get rid of? So we're all, I think I'm doing what my grandmother probably would have done, but my grandmother did not have the same tools. My great grandparents didn't have the same tools. And but just to say one more thing, in talking with Sed, we were talking about our lineage and first generation college, but it's significant what we do with our monies and what we do with our education once we're out of the conditions in which we emerge out of. I'm one generation removed from cleaning other people's homes. I'm only two generations removed from sharecropping, and I'm only three generations removed from enslavement in this country. So like what I do with my time and my money, I really have to be conscious of that, and have to bring other people with me. And plants, we have to honor plants and trees and all of that stuff because we're not in this world alone. Animals, we better make friends. you know Okay, I'm sorry, Zakiya.
No, I was just gonna say, maybe this garden and naming after our loved ones that have transitioned and like our ancestors might be a Carolina thing because my plants are named after my ancestors, both political and biological. So
Ashe.
Okay.
yeah, so it just you have to water them and and tend to them on a regular basis. And so that is a part of my practice as well. So I was like trying not to like get emotional as you were explaining that. I was like, "Oh my gosh, look at me." Doing the same thing it says grandma. So just like and it's also like it's a joyful practice as well. Like I get to talk to my grandparents and just like I'm like, "Oh, grandma, you a little dry. Um, let me get you some water." This is why things been going a little awry this week because I haven't watered grandma. So it's just like another, it just makes me think of just like this is one of the ways that we carry memory forward that is not in a traditional sense, and like thinking about how we document these practices as well of like when people ask like how can they participate in memory practices, it's like this is one of them, right? This is not an archival box. It's messy, it gets dirty when you have to repot and you have to figure out what's going on with the plant and change it during the seasons and its location, and like it's work, just like archival work is work, but like it's not the same it's not the same practice, but it still carries that memory and tradition forward. So thank you for sharing that, Sid.
Yes, thank you both. So I want to ask my final, I guess, individual question to you, Zakiya. So you lead the Black Memory Workers, a community of over 300 Black diasporic memory workers committed to practicing care and intention as they prioritize documentation, long-term preservation, and celebration of Black life. Your research explores archival practices that account for the material conditions of Black life and the role of cooperative thought and the sustainability of cultural memory. So, how does the Black Memory Workers function as a Maroon collective, a space for or a space of refuge, skill sharing, and mutual aid in the often hostile and under-resourced landscape of archival labor? How do you understand cooperative thought and collective archival practice as strategic responses to institutional neglect, extraction, and the privatization of Black memory? And as you work on archiving the Black web and co-produce Somebody's Gone, how do you see digital archival work as creating fugitive infrastructures?
Ooh, questions. Um, yeah, so I guess I'll tell folks like the Black Memory Workers group was founded in 2020, sort of in response to the ways that Black archivists and memory workers were sort of observing extractive practices, documenting people's experience of COVID, as well as the pain around the death of George Floyd and many others, and the corresponding uprisings and other forms of organizing and community support that formed, where you have sort of larger institutions that are like trying to get people's stories while they are still experiencing the many things that we were all experiencing in 2020 without any sort of efforts to express care. And it was more about we have to get these stories, we have to get them. And it's like thinking about, you know, we can think about movements pre-digital, where there was usually someone on the ground who's like thinking about that, who's like picking up all the flyers, who's like, I'm gonna take this poster home, I'm gonna grab it, I'm gonna make sure I get a t-shirt. And they are the ones whose collections we are able to sort of explore today because they decided to like grab these materials. Um, we also have like journalism, and like there are people who are interviewing on the ground, and like that is a pretty common practice, and media gets information flowing. But um, to think about like this sort of um, creating like there's urgency, but there doesn't have to be like this, you know, extractive haste of like, we have to get your stories before they disappear. And it's like, we are here in 2020. There are so many people with cell phones who have documented things that they probably shouldn't have had that cell phone here at this protest, but they got it. So we got the stories. Like, let people live in their moment, let people organize and cry and grieve and like build together before we start extracting. And so the group kind of started like that with just like 30 archivists and memory workers and has expanded to more than 300. And it's a support space that sort of exists outside of the traditional archival spaces, with a monthly call where people can come in and lament and vent and cry and like celebrate each other, and sort of circulate information and practices that are about us and for us, outside of traditional listservs, like, you know, with professional organizations. Um, and yeah, like people, we have a good time. Like talk about Black joy. Like for that hour that we are together, we are cackling, we are strategizing. You know, what I can think of as like a maroon practice within archives, like that's it. Like we are doing all the things, trying to support people as best as possible. Um, and yeah, it's a way for us to steal away, especially as people are like in their workspaces and they're like, I can't talk about certain things right now, but like I'm gonna be in the chat, or I just want to be in a virtual space with Black people, even if I can't like, you know, turn my camera on or I can't like be myself in this moment. It just feels good to like have this little headphone in and like listen to what's going on. And so, yeah, I think of it as like a steal away practice, that I hope to like continue to expand in 2026, so that we can continue to think about and build resources for ourselves that support us as, you know, within like squarely within archival practice and those who like identify as archivists. Less than 5% identify as Black.
Mm.
And that has been that way for a long time. Even as more people get into the field, into the practice, that is a very small percentage, to think about who is stewarding and, um, you know, determining what gets preserved and how it's made available. Um, and in addition to that, I think another part of sort of the Marronage practice is that you don't have to be a degree card carrying archivist to be in the space. If you are in the work of memory and memory work, and you are dedicated, whether you are a family historian, you are an artist, you are oral historian, you did one oral history and you are dedicated and you care about this work, come through, be fed, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and go forth. And so, yeah, it's not like sort of policed in the way that other places are around like your credentials. I don't need to know that. No one needs to know that unless you tell them. And so, yeah, it's like a much more open space in that way. And I think to your other questions around cooperative thought, which certainly informs my understanding of Black memory workers, but also um, some of the work that I do broadly of really thinking about what Marilyn named earlier of like, traditional archives have space, they have real estate, they have resources, and collectively, so do we. But we often think about our individual spaces of like, you know, I have a 700 square foot apartment. How am I going to like collect materials about my family and my community? Even though people have done it with less square footage and like not owning property and not like, all of these things. And so, thinking about where we can share the resources that we do have, whether that's space, whether we go in together on a traditional storage unit or an archival like quality storage unit and say, okay, we're going to split these costs, or if you can't cover it this month, then we'll figure it out together. Or I have the boxes, you have the tables. Let's like do some archival work together. And then we're going to eat afterwards because that's what we like to do. And we want to spend time together while we think about like sharing the resources that we do have access to. Um, and so a lot of my work is around getting people to think about the resources that they already have. Um, and sometimes it is like you just have an open space in your apartment or in your home where people can spread things out and like inventory them. And they may not have open spaces in their home in the same way. Or maybe have a good understanding of like traditional archival materials and like you want to offer and give a workshop to your friends, like, and then y'all do some processing and then you eat and drink and be merry. Um, and just like understanding that we are not meant to steward our histories alone. We didn't create them alone. So we should not be expected to be the lone steward. There are many different roles we can hold. Like one person has it in their home, but there's another person who's responsible for like getting that information out to the family. There's another person who's digitizing. And I think Marilyn's archival practice is a good example of that with all of her army of young people, as she calls it, of having people doing different things from their different perspectives, which makes the work feel less like a burden, makes it feel less like not integral to your existence and your survival into the future. If it feels like work, and not like a collective practice that you're doing with the people who are already you're already struggling and living and existing with, then you may not want to do it as often. You may not want to check into those boxes and file cabinets and photo albums because you're like, oh, I have to sit down and do this. But if it's like everybody's coming over, we're doing it together, we can tell stories, we can, document together, then it can feel a little less like work and more like love and like collective work, which feels differently than work.
I like that. Less like work and more like love. Okay.
Can I throw something in there?
Mhm.
It was just something that Zakiya said earlier about the sense of urgency and not rushing really resonated because I think that's an important sentiment in this moment where literally by design things are happening quickly to create this sense of we have to rush before everything disappears. And I appreciated what Zakiya was sharing that to me that signals a remembering of like we have other ways to remember things and to share each other's stories that is outside of scanning something or that type of thing. And it made me think of um, Toni Cade Bambara's essay on the issues of roles. Love that piece. But when she says at the end that if it may be unpopular to believe that we don't have time, but we do, and in the sense of we have to make the time for these types of spaces, that if we want to see these revolutions, that's actually starting with the practice of ourselves and in community.
Yes.
And that takes time to do, and that's actually worth taking the time to do, as opposed to what often, especially in this moment, what often feels like reaction. That if we're on the defense, that limits our ability to create because we're responding as opposed to being more in a generative space.
I so agree with that. Stop lying to yourself about poverty and lack and just admit to the abundance in the world. And, there's no lack of time, there's no lack of resources. And for I think that poverty has been sold to us as a concept, and if we embrace it, that's what we get. The more you talk about what you don't have, the more you don't have. And when you look at, and I think that's one of the reasons why I talk or collect or write or make photographs because I saw like some good stuff. And I'm like, how come like nobody's talking about this? You know, the things, the people who had the media, the things that I was taking in as a young person or even as a child, but like I'm not that. I mean, I don't see that, you know. So let me make photographs of what I see. So and I think more than documents of something, the photographs are the thing itself. They're the agents themselves. We need those things to activate the joy and activate, you know, the love, you know, by sharing. So I think the thing that we're talking about is sharing, and what are we sharing, or maybe these documents that we've collected about ourselves. Look at me like 50 years ago. Look at me like 200 years ago. And how come I'm just seeing this now? Where have these things been all the time?
Yeah. And I'll just add to that because I think the same forces that are creating this sort of impulse of like we have to document now before we lose everything and we're just busy and we're just like chasing and being reactive are the same forces that, and that scarcity also creates this like um this feeling of like, oh, we need to like keep everything private and locked down and not shared amongst ourselves of like, I don't want anyone to get access to this. And just to make the note that like these are the same types of forces that are creating this like we need to like be private. And while I do think there is like things that should be undocumented or exclusive, as we speak about Marronage and like, you know, thinking about like Catherine McKittrick's work on like the unmapped routes and like the importance of that. Like some things need to be unmapped to get us from point A to point B, if we don't want people following us. But like amongst ourselves and in our trusted communities that we are accountable to, like not feeling like we have to always be worried about like theft and like it's like that is a thing, right? But like safety is something that we create together. And so we can think about safety of our materials through through those same like community technologies and mechanisms as well.
Yes, thank you for saying that. That feels like such a balm for my last question for all of you all, which is around some of those limitations. Because for us as Kinfolk Tech, you know, we are a digital or a digital first technology organization using digital and immersive technologies to preserve stories, often excluded and erased. But we're also very wary of the dangers of centralizing our stories and those limitations. And so, for each of you, I was actually curious about like what are the contradictions, pitfalls, and limitations you've encountered in your archival and memory work? When does the imperative to document and preserve come into tension with the imperative to protect and keep fugitive? Are there things that should not be archived, should not be made accessible, should remain in the realm of the undocumented and the unknowable? And just like, how are you navigating the fact that archives can be tools of both liberation and surveillance?
Ooh.
From the void.
I don't have an answer for that. I mean, I think as
Miss Marilyn, your camera's off. Did you
I
want to?
know.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Respect.
No, I was, you know, I was trying to answer a question. I have a stack of books here, and somebody was asking for names of books, and I was trying to like multitask. Um, I think that there are things that we what shouldn't be said. I mean, like I think that I say what I say, and what I don't say, I don't say. I don't think I have a, you know, a list of what I don't want to say. I just don't say it, you know. So I don't know how to answer that question. Like you don't tell everything, you know.
We were talking a little bit about this last night. I think one factor in this is the the age that we are in, the the technology and the digitalness. which in a certain type of way is a non-physical thing. And I think that that's where, you know, that development just kind of gets confusing. We were talking about like, is there actually photography now? Because at one point it was photography is a word that actually denotes a physical thing happening with light and chemicals and things like that. And so the transition into digital technology in general is a really big change, but there's always these steps in between. And I think folks on this panel and others are some of the ones who get to be a part of that, you know, and always sort of learning what those steps take. So scanning, for example, there was a point in time when there was, um, you know, you have computers, you have the ability to look at images on computers, but the images still needed to be scanned through a scanner. And now scanners are a little obsolete in a public sense, but of course we use them. Um, and then now you have things that are born digitally, will die digitally, they will leave. So when I thought about the question and me and Mrs. Nance were talking, I was like, I gotta say that I think that people should take advantage of downloading whatever it is that they have that exists within social media apps, for example. Um, no matter what, like if I try to remember how I met somebody and I can't remember how I met them, if I like met them in the last 20 years, 9 times out of 10, I met that person on Flickr, which is a photography website. And from Flickr, we became friends on Tumblr, all these other places. But for some reason, it was always that gathering space. So there's so many memories in our lives that are traced through the technology as well. So I don't necessarily see it as evil. I just see the reality that if they turn the lights off, then all those things are gone. So it's like that Denzel meme with Jamie Foxx. He's like, I'm about to leave here with something. I think we should just take our, you know, we've paid with our attention and our time and watching all the ads. We should, you know, take um, that information, that visual information, and just do whatever it is that we need to do with it. But I want to urge people to take advantage of those particular tools on the sites for downloading off of Facebook and Instagram and
Thank you.
whatever else.
Yeah.
Just put it in a hard drive or something.
I'm so
Decide
glad
what to do with it later.
from the analog days because I do have a significant amount of my production that is not digital, but I'm digitizing it so I can share it with people.
Exactly.
But I'm glad that it's analog because if it comes down to me proving I actually made this is my authorship, I can reach right over there, get the negative, and yeah, you fight me. You know, I have the negative digitally that we can't trust anything digital these days so yeah, I'm glad for that ability to look back at an analog time in an analog way, but I also do respect the digital as a way to sort of like find things like using the AI capabilities of like Apple or something to like it, I can look at like for instance, if I take a picture of you, said I may be able to go back and then Apple will say, oh, you have a picture of Sed from 2014. I was like, oh, we were in the same space at that time. And I may not be able to look back and see that. There's certain things that I don't see in my archive or don't present themselves to me. But that's another reason for sharing because the things that other people will see. And I've shared with historians and they're saying, hey, is that whatever, is that G2 you see there? And I'm like, oh yeah, well, there's certain things I overlook. And so the sharing, and if I share it with you and my art, my node goes down, then you still have it. So that's the
This
whole
is,
basic
yeah,
of the internet.
I completely agree with you. We were talking about a notable archivist here in Salvador named Lázaro Alberto, and his archive is called the Zumbi Archive. And I was working with him early on in my dissertation, and I was trying to tell Mrs. Nance, like, I know I saw you in his archive, I just couldn't remember where. But just as you were talking about with like the technology, I could just type in your name, and if it's in any of the videos that I took or any of the pictures that I took, it would come up. Or it identifies your face, and yes,
Because
it's
I get
very,
around.
and I could just put in the dates and stuff like that. I think it's
Mhm.
here. It's all
Yeah.
over. It's part of what our lives. So we have to, again, take what we can from it. But I do think it's important to remember that we're physical people, especially us. So this Marronage thing doesn't happen without us actually physically finding a way to be in touch with each other. And I wanted to thank Zakiya for this monthly group because I get the calendar invite every month. I always reserve and I don't show up because I've for years now, I've come a couple times, but I'm like, I want to have something to contribute when I get there because I know these archivists are like doing their thing or whatever. But I appreciate you um, telling from your point of view about why it's important. And I think that it's a blend of this analog sensibilities, which
Mhm.
we can't escape from and we
Mhm.
shouldn't. We have to keep in whatever else is ahead. Um, the work that Kinfolk Tech is doing, this virtual meeting, by the way, and I think we have to be comfortable about that. And to me, that just speaks towards a intergenerational thing and memory too, by the way. So thank you, Zakiya, for doing that. I'm gonna come now. I can come because I've done my dissertation.
And I just want to add to that. Oh my gosh, I just drew a blank. I had the thought. Come back to me.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll
You know,
go, but if it comes back and you want to hop in, I'm happy to pause so you could get it out so it doesn't go again. But I think yeah, I have lots of thoughts about technology, and I think, I wouldn't do my due diligence if I didn't follow up with what said suggestion is after you download it from your social media platforms or clouds and elsewhere, make sure you're putting it on multiple devices, a hard drive, another hard drive, maybe take that hard drive to someone else's house that you trust, so that we're thinking about when we have sort of acute crises or things that happen in our spaces that it can be safe elsewhere. Or yeah, you know, reach out to me if you want to know more. But I won't get too in the weeds. But yeah, don't just download it and forget it. And maybe try to do some organizing in there as well so you know what's what and you don't have all these files that are now unusable because you don't know what's going on.
yeah.
Anywho.
Have an accountability partner.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts around like the ways that technology has created access, which I think is a beautiful thing in so many ways. But I think it's important for us to think about like access as not being like the very top tier, like high moral ground that sometimes we create it to be of like, we have to be able to access everything, and every talk has to be recorded and then circulated so everybody can get every piece of information and we can all be on the same page, because it's just like that's not realistic. And we are creating massive amounts of data and like in these recordings that, you know, people do use them. That is a fact, but not everything has to be recorded all the time and circulated all the time. And yeah, often in spaces people will joke about like, like people are asking, is this being recorded? And I'm one of those people that will ask, but I do watch the recordings.
Mhm.
And I had like have them on in the background while I'm working on other things so I can be do my due diligence of like if I ask for this recording, I'm gonna actually watch it. But there are some things that don't need to be recorded, like the Black memory workers calls, as valuable as they are not recorded ever. Um, and like I kick AI bots out because that doesn't need to be in there either. But we share notes, which are like, okay, these are things that are good to share that can be circulated, but like our conversations are meant for whoever was here in this moment. If there's 30 out of the 300 that are here, that's who gets to enjoy these laughs and these tears and these moments. Um, And so I think it's important for us to distinguish and like be very intentional about when we decide something is made public and when we decide something is like kept for the future and how long and where and who has access to it. Um, Even though there's such ease in like creating a recording or creating a born digital photograph and just being like, yep, it's going to be on the cloud forever and ever. I'm not going to think about it anymore. But like that lives somewhere. It takes up space. It takes up water that like our physical beings need more than that digital photo needs it. And so we have to kind of balance these things together of like, yes, it feels good to know that like the photo you can set it and forget it because you have these 17,000 photos on your iCloud. Um, but like that's a lot of photos to leave your descendants, one.
Mm.
And two, yeah, the actual physical resources that these photos do take up as they are stored on cloud storage and other places. And so I think that's one thing to think about. I also, this conversation makes me think about like social media in general and like debates around when we explain things to white people online. And people are like, why did you answer that question? Where they're like, what's this? What's that song? Where does this come from? And people are like, I'll tell you. And other people are like,
Ush. Right.
can we have some secrets, please? Like, why are you explaining to them, you know, how much how much sugar we put in Kool-Aid? That's not their business. Like, that is for us to know and us only, or like recent conversations sort of prompted by centers around like hoodoo being a closed practice that doesn't need to be like
Talked
told to
about.
everybody. And yeah, I think it's important for us to like be okay with things not being for everybody all the time.
Oh,
I
that's such a good point. Sorry.
and so these are conversations that
South
are
Carolina
happening
talking about
all
hoodoo.
the time of like that's just not everybody's business. Like I think about being a kid and being like that's grown folks talk and like that's and when you get older you like, you know what? I did not actually need to be using my brain capacity to understand that at 8. That was grown folks talk. And I can understand it now. And so I think it's okay to like have the unknowable and acknowledge why some things this last thing I'm gonna say. I think it's also important to acknowledge that there are things that we want to know that like we maybe would have known as Black people had we not been displaced, extracted, moved around, etc. And so I think it's important to also not punish our impulses to want to know things about like other diasporic cultures other than like those of our own as like Black Americans. Um, and not like punish that impulse, but like and understand why there are things that like we maybe would have known if we were left alone, or if we weren't removed from this particular community, or if this access wasn't like prevented or like we didn't lose these resources. And so I think that like, yeah, we just kind of have to balance all of those things, and balance like yeah, are not overusing technology while recognizing its benefits.
There's some really good questions in here. I've been trying to answer some, but are we going to do the Q&A?
Yeah, I was just gonna thank you
Yeah.
all so much
Wait,
for
Cleaver didn't get to go.
Oh, Cleaver, were you jumping in?
Just real quick, because
Oh,
I'm really glad Zakiya went first, because I was just thinking about maroonage, like that word, and that practice, whether it's the maroons or the palenqueros or the in the quilombos, that there's a code, and also everybody wasn't allowed into those spaces. You got literally checked at the gate, like, is this the energy? Because we can't afford to play with no maybes were allowed, is what I'm saying. It's
Mhm.
either in it or you're not. And I think that I'm really just echoing the things Zakiya was saying, that that's what was coming to mind, is that we have to be okay with that too, that some things do get to be gate kept. We don't have to share the recipe for Kool-Aid with everybody. Um, and that, yeah, and that there's ways again that we've learned to communicate, and that's part of the remembering as well, is that we literally have created languages and codes and braiding hair in certain ways as these ways to communicate in plain sight. That even, for example, in my book, there's like a whole conversation visually that isn't necessarily, it's not directly referred to in the writing, and that was partly by design of, you look at things, and if you're a part of that conversation, then you understand what's going there, because there's not going to be anywhere that explains to you this is what's happening in this picture. It's that what I've experienced, that people can see a painting of an old woman's hands peeling, like cutting up a pepper, and they're saying that's my grandma's hands. That was the point of that, of if you can connect to that, then you can identify it, because it doesn't, I just agree with that. We don't have to always explain everything in that way. And that we have developed practices to educate one another and ourselves. Um, yeah, because that's part of preservation. We also have learned that when you give a piece to everybody, we get left with nothing. They literally extract it until there's nothing left, the dust of it, that we get to keep that for our own preservation. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Sorry, Ms. Nance.
No, there's some questions that people have about storage and, all kinds of, like, what book was that? So let's talk to the people.
Yeah, let's get into it. So first, I just want to thank you all for this beautiful conversation. There's so many seeds that y'all are sowing for myself, and I'm sure for folks in the audience. So definitely want to invite you, if you have a question, to put it in the Q&A chat. I know we've started answering some, so hopefully we got to some of these around books and references. Rebecca Renard Wilson says, not a question, just a reflection. Sed's comment about downloading digital content feels so important, especially now that the power of satellites, which allows those bytes to be transmitted, is in the hands of crazy, erratic fools like Musk. I'm really interested in how we take back that control, the collective sharing of physical ephemera, and the reinstitution of memorizing stories like in Fahrenheit 451 feels so necessary now. We have Anonymous. What do you think about Julietta Singh's book, No Archive Will Restore You, if you've read it? Has anyone read that book? Okay, sorry, sorry. We haven't read that book. Okay. Somebody is wondering who will save our analog film? Question mark, exclamation point. Stress, I understand. We have a question. I have a question concerning ephemera. So lots around ephemera. How is it possible to archive the ephemeral? Oh, sorry. I think when people are replying, it pushes it. Uh-oh. Okay. How is it possible to archive the ephemeral? I'm thinking about Jose Esteban Munoz's definition of ephemera. How can we engage with queer ephemerality with the ephemerality of voices of oral histories? Does anybody want to take that? Kleaver, I see a face. I don't know if you felt. Was there an urge?
No, I don't fully understand.
I see. Maybe you can clarify your question, please. Okay, let's see. What are the largest external hard drives that you recommend for storage? Thinking about recordings, film archives, what are the most affordable? I don't know if there's any quick responses to that we can recommend.
It sounds to me like there needs to be some technical session.
And yeah, I see another question.
Oh, yeah.
I would say on hard drives, you can Western Digital is a good brand. Seagate is another popular brand.
Glyph, Glyph. I particularly don't like Western Digital because one failed on me and it soured me, but I like Glyph.
Well,
Geo.
that's an important note. You need to replace your hard drives every 5 to 7 years because they do fail. So they are not a like
Bruce.
life-lasting technology.
No, they will fail. They have to. They're plastic and metal.
It's 100% guaranteed to fail. We just don't know when.
Exactly. That's why you got to have multiple copies on different
Yeah.
platforms or different devices.
I got on my sister once for printing out email, But one day I saw a printed out email that she had, and it was important information. I was like, oh, and because she had printed it out, I was able to, because I stored it digitally, I was able to go back and find it. So like I print stuff like paper kind of lasts a little bit longer than the digital stuff, as long as it doesn't get wet or eaten by bugs or whatever, or burnt up. Paper's good.
I like that we can still print things.
Mhm.
I think that that's special. And I think at a certain point, this sort of conversation, because there's so many different types of memories or histories or things that have happened that we want to remember, there's so many different types of it. It kind of depends on what it is that you're talking about. Are you talking about your family's history specifically? Are you talking about the belongings of someone? Are you talking about the photographs of an event? Are you talking about stories about what happened? And I think that this is where, to me, it can go down different roads. Some of it may go down a very creative road. So to create a play or a story about an event is another way of archiving it in a certain way. To make a film, to record it again, to just record someone's voice on your phone telling about what happened and then later on doing something else with that are all ways of remembering, which is why this type of thing is so special to me and intimidating, because I think that it's so important. And I think some people were just kind of naturally born to do it. And I didn't see myself as that type of person, although I've been a photographer for a very, very long time. I didn't see that. So I think that might get a little bit to the question about ephemera as well. I think it really just depends, but I think people should listen to what their urge is on how to remember something, and whatever that act is, to be confident about it, and then sign up for the Black Memory Workers monthly call.
And I can speak to the ephemera question as well. I did read this text a very long time ago, but just thinking about ephemerality and ephemera, for those who might not be familiar with the term, is really thinking about things that disappear easily and are forgotten about easily. So like websites are ephemeral because they could be there today and not there tomorrow. You know, a ticket stub could that you get from a concert or a play is something that like some people keep and like collect as memorabilia, but like it can also just be like tossed away, or like notes that we write on scrap paper or sticky notes are things that like typically or sometimes get tossed away as like, okay, it served its purpose, like we're done with it, but it represents or at least like my sticky notes represent all types of things. But like, and they're literally all over the place. But they do document a certain part of your experience, no matter how like, sort of minuscule it may seem. And so I think that, and also like our conversations and like the things we do that like are not documented are also ephemeral, like interactions. And so I think um to thinking about like the specific text of like queer communities, marginalized communities, Black communities are the things that we do that are not that are like our everyday quotidian lives are not often documented in these like big ways. But that's like our responsibility to be doing that. So if you met a really cool person today, that like was something they said changed the trajectory of your life, the only way for the future to know that is if you document that in some way, if you wrote it down in your notebook. So like I try to have a practice of reflecting in my planner every day of like met this really cool, but actually my planner has a section for reflection for every day, where I'm just like met this really cool person today, like, or got to spend time with Marilyn today. We talked about blah, 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 blah. And this is something we see in like the notebooks and diaries of like our beloved Black women writers, and like Black queer writers and artists where they just like you have phone numbers scribbled like on a napkin and they just like write, person I met at the bar, we talked about blah 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 blah. And that gives you some insight into these moments that like would not be like publicly documented or like no one was filming you meet the love of your life. But like if you write about it, then everybody knows about how you met the love of your life. Or if you did an audio recording, like Alice Walker did like so many of, like, then we know exactly what you were thinking in that moment, and like how you experienced that moment. And it's not so ephemeral because now we have it documented.
Yes, real quick, I was being goofy off the camera because I was trying to find uh these notebooks that I had one for me and one for my son, whose name is Lona. And on all our trips, he saves um little things. He likes going to Sonics when we're in the United States, and I make him also write about his experience. And this is old school stuff. This is just a notebook, and then I have one where I keep other things from his life, ticket stubs and things like that, and just love letters to him and whatnot. And I think that sometimes the simplest answer
Mm.
uh, is the best one, and it also requires us to pass down and teach these terms of order. That is what is really missing when we are identifying these problems. Like we all need to be remembering, and now you don't have to remember everything, but we need to have it as a value, uh, as a part of our value. So I'm hoping to teach him that, and he's a Gen Alpha, so
Mhm.
I'm just happy he knows what paper is,
Right, best of luck.
you know.
I want to get to this question from Somi Kakoma, I think. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. They say the idea of, quote, not sharing all of the codes, so what we've been talking about with the Kool-Aid, is very important, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that does or does not resolve the politics of exclusion from and or visibility within the global cultural imaginary and the ways in which that does not allow us to collectively remember or historicize so much of our contemporary creative practices, I think. They say
Right.
contemporary creative practices.
Mm. Well, when I think about sharing all the codes, I think it's if you're traveling, you can share the codes like face to face, but the sharing digitally and online, I think is what was kind of not encouraged, sharing all. I mean, but I had this talk with Sed and about foodways and like being in Brazil, they think that they invented rice and beans or whatever, and no, we have that over here, and to be able to share that is like I don't know, it's like there's nothing that replaces like face to face. So I'm encouraging everyone to travel and then share the code, but don't just sit in front of your screen and tell everything.
I wanted to add the way I was hearing us talking about that, it wasn't so much about exclusion, it's about intentionally how we're sharing those things. Because I do agree that um, there's an importance of us, the community part of that is shared knowledge and agreements and these types of things. But I think, at least for me, community also involves accountability. And so how do we share these things, like or I should say there's responsibility in that sharing, and that we know the way groups of people work is that's usually a few people's job. That's not everybody's job to be sharing it. Like Zakiya was saying earlier, that some people are going to be doing one thing, and that's the community part. So I don't necessarily hear it as a form of exclusion, and I think visibility is tricky, especially now because we're in a hyper visible moment. That's not always necessarily to our benefit to be seen. Like for example, we've seen the ways that a hyper visibility around trans folks has created a type of danger as well. That's not just a matter of representation that, and we know that even like when we share things like this by sharing the address, I mean, as a community organizer, I've been in experiences where we've shared the address of the things that we're doing, and that invited the ops into that space. And that also complicates things when we're that open in that way that we can be. There's strategy or yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think what I hear inside of us saying being mindful of the sharing is strategy. There's an organization to it.
I just want to talk. This isn't the opposite, but I just want to talk about gathering together. A recent experience that I had. My first cousin, and also to address a question about what part genealogy plays in archiving. That was a question from Cheryl Miller, who's a photographer and friend of mine. Recently, my first cousin passed away, and we went to she was funeralized by her niece, my baby cousin, who has the papers and the photographs of her great grandparents, my grandparents, her grandparents, uncles, aunts, and she just laid all of these pictures out on a big dining room table and said, "Look, let's sort this out. I don't know who some of these people are. My son is definitely not going to know who these people are." And she pretty much gathered together the 70-year-old cousins, and we just sorted them out and put them in groups. So we did a family archiving project, which wasn't in the back of my head. I thought that that was something that we might do, but it's something we actually did, and we started it. I think everyone's got the archiving bug now. You know, I added my 2 cents. No, we gotta use pencils. Let's use post-its. We didn't have any archival materials there. We used baggies, you know, like plastic Ziploc bags. Because you use what you have. Someone asks about materials. You start with what you have, and then you graduate. But more importantly, I think we all came back with a different archival sense, the archival bug, and we planned another trip where we're going to get together and do the same thing and pull some more stuff out of the garage. Garage is not a good place to put stuff, but that's where it was. So the important thing, and someone also, I'm going to answer another question. What's the difference between archiving and hoarding? If you have more than 2 shopping bags full of stuff in any corner of your house, you are a hoarder. That's right. You know, if you have, I mean, if you, so to me, if you want to step up archivally, get a box, even if it's not archival, get boxes that are the same size and be uniform about it, be modular about it. Graduate to archival boxes. If you have to start with Ziploc bags, that's what you do. If you have to start with shopping bags, that's what you do. But we must graduate, because if you got shopping bags all over the place and something happens to you, somebody's just going to throw that shopping bag away. But if it's in a box, a nice file, they're going to, this must be something. So we have to make sure that we show respect and value to the things that we collect, and no more shopping bags.
Yeah.
That's all.
Hoarder feels like a loaded term. I like to say
Yeah.
keeper of things. But on a serious note, part of what I was hearing from listening to y'all sharing is also if they're in that distinction of like hoarding versus archiving.
Mhm.
I feel like what I was hearing from y'all is who are we keeping things for and for what? That I think if you can answer that, just thinking about me as a keeper, I
Mhm.
keep a lot of things, but I do have a section, a part of my house where because of friends that are archivists being taught of, well, if you're really serious about keeping that, then you should put this in a type of plastic and that type of thing. So I do have a collection of things that I'm clear. This needs to exist beyond me. And then there's things that are just for me in this lifetime that won't get buried with me. But there is a section of things that I'm intentional about. I do want this to be, if anything happens to me, at least that, like what Miss Marilyn just shared, if they run into this section of things, they know that I wanted to keep that for somebody else, for whoever was gonna find it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's the intentionality. I think that's the exact word behind it of like you've kept these things and you have decided like this is not just a big bag of things that like you can generally say what's in there, you know what's in there, you know where it's at, and you have some intentions for shifting the way that it's currently organized, and like you plan to graduate even if you're not there yet, you have some plan to do so. But I think it's important to think about like hoarding, which is definitely a loaded term, and I think a lot of people use it very sparingly about themselves. Um, when if you ask them what they have, they can tell you very detailed, like, oh, I've been collecting like this type of film. I keep these types of programs and flyers from these events, but I don't keep flyers for these types of events. Like if you can break down, like you don't just keep everything, but like you keep some things, that is a good indicator that like you are having a like archival collecting practice, as opposed to like you pick up masses of newspapers and like you don't know what time period these newspapers are from, what's in them, if there's something living between them. You just have stuff and you can't tell what the stuff is. And I think to answer another question about weeding and deciding what to keep, I think it's important to think about what what it means for you and how you keeping that is going to be communicated to the people that come after you, or the people who live alongside you that like will interact with these materials, or who you intend to interact with these materials. And so if you're, you know, yeah, so thinking about that, I think it's important to also think about keeping things and archiving them is a responsibility, and it is something you are dedicating yourself to. And so I think it's important to decide like, what am I committed to preserving long term and like holding space for physically in my space, holding space for in my heart and mind as I think about graduating it to different levels of preservation, as I think about committing to moving it from place to place as you may move throughout your life, as you commit to thinking about, you know, ensuring that it's okay, or like possibly insuring it through insurance as well, and having, you know, the proper protections in place in your home to like take care of it, keeping it at a high level as opposed to in a basement or on the ground. Like that is a commitment to like taking care of these things. And so if you know in your heart of hearts you not committing to that, maybe think about someone in your close community that is willing to do that, and you can go visit with it, but it's not in your house. And so that's where the cooperative work comes in of like, you're like, I'm not doing all that. And that's fine. Not everybody needs to do all that. But
How do you find help?
talk to the people you already talk to. Though that's the first place. Your people. And getting them in conversation around, I have this stuff and I don't want it to just be stuff to other people. I want it to be distinguished as like Kleaver says, when someone comes in and they see it, they're not like, oh, this is junk, or this person's a hoarder. Like they know it's important to you because you talk about it. Like people know what's important to you because you talk about it all the time. Like if you are really passionate about something, you talk about it. So if you don't ever talk about those archival materials,
And it's
when you're
junk.
not here to talk about it anymore, people are going to be like, well, she ain't never said nothing about this. So
Mm.
I
And,
don't,
mm. And why do we want to keep it? I mean, why do we want to be?
why?
I talk to myself about that, you know. And I think I have some history that that's kind of interesting. Well, once you get older, you look back and you're like, oh, that wasn't just something, that was part of a whole series of historical, you know, things. And so I think we're called upon to understand ourselves, and
Yeah.
if your pile of junk doesn't help you understand yourself, maybe, you know, maybe it is a pile of junk, you know. Um,
Yeah.
you have to be able to retrieve the stuff, not only to save it, but you have to have some system of retrieval so that you can get it out of there and share it with whoever's gonna, like, there's scholars that need to know what I have, and I know that. And so that's kind of my commitment. How can I make this available to those people that, I'm tired of reading books that don't have pictures in it, you know? What can I do about that, so I think we have to take responsibility for the things that we want to see in this world.
Mm.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I just had a bunch of thoughts while listening to everybody, and they're all over the place, but it's just a thing when you remember the world before the internet. That's that's like one reality, and then there's another reality, and you go back and forth sometimes during conversations like this. But my first immediate thought was like, that's kind of what a lot of libraries were for back in the day. It was just common thing that uh, if there's a class issue in this as well, but librarians and libraries were sort of known for taking certain things that were important to at least the people in that town and organizing it. That was one thing. But I remember after working in philanthropy for several years in Connecticut, just area of the country that has like the highest uh, and the lowest wealth gaps. And I worked at the local philanthropy, which was a pretty big endowment. And one of the things that I always remember were that archival institutions and like theaters and a couple of institutions were evergreenly funded. They didn't have to apply for anything. And what I took from that was that there was so much power that resided in the memories of certain classes of people. And I don't know if the memories that they were preserving was the power itself, or there was power in their them being able to preserve the memories and everybody else just lived below. That's really the real reason why I named the organization Atlantic Archives doing the work here, because I just wanted the young people, or they're not all young, but I wanted them to be able to say, I am the director of the Black Trans Archive here, because I knew that that word, especially English, just sat in a certain type of place, and that they would get a certain type of attention just by having that in the name itself. And I still like encourage people to start in that way, and then maybe the other things will catch up, especially with this type of knowledge being spread and being shared. So it's just dawning on me, even on a deeper level, how important it is to be a part of this conversation. So I just want to say thanks to everybody for that. And thanks to Kinfolk Tech and Black Women Radical.
Oh, thank you. And beautiful last words. In the interest of time, those are all the questions that we can get to now, but I just want to thank you all again for all of the many insights that you offered. Before we go, I do want to do a light unveiling of the beautiful work that Kleaver has done with us, creating a digital archive to Afrofeminist activists, Lilia Gonzalez. We have a couple of slides just to showcase the artwork that was born from Kleaver's research. This is available in the Kinfolk app. It's also being featured in our exhibition that's currently on view in Manhattan. But I wanted to invite you, Kleaver, if you had a couple of words to say about, yeah, this image that we're seeing on the screen here.
Yes, Lelia Gonzalez changed the game for me, learning about her. If you're not familiar, she was a Black feminist from Brazil of Afro-Indigenous heritage who did um, a large, like her most memorable work was in the 70s and the 80s. She passed away in the early 90s from health issues. But the reason I worked on part of her legacy with Kinfolk was to amplify two things in particular. Was that I'm a writer, and so I love when people make up words. And Lelia was known for coining two terms. One of them was Americanidade, which was her way of articulating that there's something that connects the Black people and the indigenous people of the Americas Yes, and more specifically, that she felt there needed to be language that reflected the reality of the contributions and the things that make the so-called Americas what it is, that it's the people, the Africans that were forced onto that land and the indigenous people that were already there. And so this term, and also pushing back on America being the US, that she was expanding it of saying, actually, all of us are Americans in these continents and more specifically we're Americanos. And she also coined another term, Portuguese, which is roughly translated as Black Portuguese. It's a play on words for the word for Portuguese in the language. And that is similar of her feeling the need that there needed to be a term to articulate that the Portuguese spoken in Brazil is actually a Black Portuguese because of the influences of West African languages like Umbanda, and also because Black women, the way they were positioned societally, not unlike in the US, were taking care of all of the children. And so a Black woman is teaching her child language and also a white child. And then therefore, the people of Brazil are speaking a type of Portuguese that is rooted in Black women's contributions and Black people's contributions. And it just felt important to me in my work to elevate that there was people in the diaspora all over it that were part of these conversations. That Lelia's work directly connects to the work of Angela Davis, for example, or even Kimberly Crenshaw's work around intersectionality. That Lelia was talking about that, writing about those things across the diaspora before that term existed, and that she exists at the same time as those women. And so it's important to put her in conversation with them. That even Angela Davis has famously said that Lelia is actually one of the greatest influences on her knowledge and understanding of Black feminism. But we never talk about Lelia. And so it's important for me to uplift her, to make sure that those of us who have the platform and attention disproportionately within the diaspora extend it to the voices that need. And I don't have to do too much extending because Lelia, if you know her, that is a powerful legacy. It just felt important to be a part of a moment that has risen within the last couple of years to elevate her legacy, because not unlike people like Zora Neale Hurston and other Black women that really did their work in their time later become obscured or not remembered. And we keep talking about memory in this conversation, that it's very important that we remember Lelia as much as we remember these other figures that we often associate to things like Black feminism and that school of thought.
You learned about her while in Brazil? Where
I
did you?
did. I
Yes.
learned about her while I was learning Portuguese, and I was
Ah,
trying to connect with who are the people in the traditions of this language that are connected to the ones that I'm a part of.
Miss
Um,
Nance, you have to take the Portuguese class so you can learn Portuguese.
We were
You have
talking
to
about
take it.
me and Marilyn were talking about that this morning.
do it.
Please.
Do it.
First of all,
Sign up.
congratulations, Cleve,
Thank you.
and you all for recognizing her. Our second fellowship here in Brazil is called the Leila Gonzalez Fellowship. Cleve and I talked about it when he came, and it was just a coincidence,
So
by the
really,
way. Yeah, and that's actually, Zakiya, you might not remember, but I was trying to link up with you when we were bringing the Leila Gonzalez Fellows to the United States. We just weren't able to link up, but that was the group that was coming. But yeah, we have a language class, and we do focus on her, and because it's all Black people most of the time, we introduced them to Portuguese, which is basically like Black English. So congratulations, this is
thank
beautiful.
you.
wow.
And that too, I'll say that too, that that idea, that concept of Portuguese is really powerful because it extends in general of like the Spanish spoken, like my family's Dominican. The Spanish spoken in the Caribbean arguably is a Black Spanish. So is the Creole languages and the versions of French and so on. That she was really just articulating through her perspective as a Brazilian. These larger things of we have to create language that acknowledges and articulates our contributions, because the way history, again, that question of the archives, if we only relied on that, it would be from a Eurocentric perspective, and that's dishonest to the realities of the moment she lived in, but also her understanding, because some of her writing was literally about the Maroons in Jamaica, that she made these connections as well, and that's important for us to remember that people across these diasporas were in similar conversations, even if they weren't all literally talking to each other.
Thank you
Mm.
so much, Kleaver. And thank you for inspiring this conversation. So I want to just invite everyone to use this QR code to download the Kinfolk app. You can also find it in your app store on iOS, Apple iOS, or Android. It's free, available to download, and you can see Kleaver's monument to Lilia there. Or if you're here in New York, you can see it in the exhibition. And so just thank you again, Kleaver, for all of the insightfulness you've brought to this work and to our team and inspiring this conversation and just so much more as we continue to do our work. I want to just thank each of our panelists for doing the brilliant work that you're all doing in your parts of the world, but also in the many overlapping and intricate ways that you all are speaking to each other across the waters. And just thank you for sharing your time with us today and answering questions and just, yeah, being open to this space. So just so much gratitude. Thank you to Jamie for partnering with Kinfolk. And so we will send this information and other information that was shared during this conversation as a follow-up. But thank you all and just have a beautiful evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. So nice to see you all.
Yes.